And we're live with our 285th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson, at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host, Seth Law, at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining today. We've got a fair amount to talk about. The news has been pretty active over the last couple of weeks. There's articles that we have not gotten to, plus some fairly large, uh, at least research topics or discussions that are popping up that we want to jump into. Before we get into that, though, I did want to reiterate that we have a live training coming up, virtual live training, I should say. This will be June 16th and 17th. Practical secure code review, AI enhanced. You can go to training.absoluteappsec.com to sign up. We will also be performing giving our Harnessing LLMs for Application Security course at DEF CON, August 11th and 12th. Both of those feature nowadays heavy use of LLMs to actually break down code. The LLMs for AppSec course will go into dynamic assessment, how to use LLMs in other aspects of application security, including threat modeling and DAST and SAST and SCA, everything else that goes into that. So please sign up if you are interested. These are opportunities to actually improve your own process and jump in and get to know how to utilize these tools, but also dig deep into secure code review, how it's actually done, what is effective, how we're actually implementing that in the modern era with the tools in general. So appreciate everyone. And outside of that, today's episode is sponsored by Dry Run Security. I'm going to turn it over to Ken to give a couple of updates on Dry Run, and then we'll dive into some of the articles and some things that we want to talk about today. Ken?
Sweet. Yeah. So I was just going to share that I put into our Slack. If you go to our Slack channel and you go to if you go to Slack workspace, which you can get to if you are not on there by going to absoluteappsec.com. If you go there, I've actually put the SAST accuracy report in the random channel. That way you don't actually have to go and download it off Dry Run site, which is like where you need to put in some information to get marketing stuff, right? Marketing and sell stuff. So anyways, you can get it just by going to the random channel, or something else that's maybe useful for folks, and I'll share this, is instead, let's see here, you can also, or in addition to, you can go in and use this link, which I'm pasting right now into YouTube, and I put into the random channel on Slack as well. But anyways, you could just use this GPT prompt to, get the TLDR, ask questions about the data, and just find out what you want if you don't want to read the report. But the TLDR is our tool absolutely obliterates all existing legacy SaaS tools, like I've been saying for some time, but now we've got the proof. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing the new way of reviewing code and just honestly getting more insights into what's going on in your organization on a day-to-day basis, what's changing from a security perspective, very useful. We call that Code Insights as a feature. It's something we don't talk very much about, but people are finding a lot of value in. Or if you want to ask questions against your code and enforce policies such as, is this, hey, we'll go with one for you, Seth. Is this introducing system-based error messages that lead to username enumeration, for example? And you can give background context. We see this with like IDOR, and like we see people using it specifically for things like GraphQL or REST API endpoints where authorization is an issue, and they want explicit patterns to be followed. But if anything falls outside of that, it's hard to write rules that predict how people are going to do things incorrectly. So they can ask broader questions, give broader background information, and then custom remediation guidance, even if they want, and then have that run on every PR, and they can block, or they can get notified, or they can do whatever they want with that. So that's my pitch. Seriously, we built something completely different, and I'm shouting it from the rooftops. You have got to try this product. That's
Yep.
my spiel for today. I'll stop marketing to everybody and we'll get into some real AppSec.
Yeah, I mean, it's good stuff. Having played with it, right, and watched the build process that's gone into engineering this type of a product. It's incredibly effective. So
Dude,
give it a shout, right? Like check it
it's
out. That's all I can say, right? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like it's crazy how especially in the space that I'm operating in, how much things have changed even in just a year. So what you saw a year ago, like to today, is night and day. It's just incredible. I'm like, dude. Anyways, I'm just really stoked about how things are going. It's like one thing to
Yep.
say things; it's another to be able to prove it and say, like, no, I told you. Like this is for real, way better. Something you haven't
Yep.
experienced yet. Anyways, all right.
All right.
Okay.
Yes. So thanks to Dry Run
I'm
for
stoked.
sponsoring. Stoked to see where it goes. But on the absolute AppSec side of things, one thing that we wanted to pop up today the first thing that we wanted to raise today is the recent noise around easyjson. I've had multiple customers come to me asking about it. Also, multiple just friends in the industry that are concerned with some of the attributions, some things that are going on specifically with easyjson. And I know we've been talking a lot about AI and LLMs. This almost feels like we're going back to the basics on the underpinnings of software in general and dependencies. Right. Before we got into the LLM discussions, we spent a lot of time talking about dependencies, and even Paul 6 Mile in Slack, he's got a bunch of stuff that he's done around Git hacks. We've got the socket.dev folks. I've done a lot of research with my team as we're looking at various dependencies for clients that takes into account attribution. And I think that's where easyjson goes. It is a package that has been developed and is depended upon by multiple first order dependencies. Does JSON parsing basically for Go libraries? So Go library needs to understand what JSON is. easyjson is the package that they've turned to that they pull in. Now, what would you describe the issue there with easyjson? I mentioned attribution, but what is your take on it?
Yeah, I think there's two articles I'll paste in. One's from Wired, one's from the Register. I think I liked the Register article better. I really can't remember, but in any case, they kind of point to, okay, so what is the issue? easyjson is maintained by some Russian folks, right? Russia is a
Mhm.
sanctioned country right now, and then so any company that's generating SBOMs and providing like attestation about their libraries is having to publicly say, like, if they don't switch out that sub dependency, which can be, as we all know, sub dependencies are so easy to just swap out, and dependencies in general are just so easy to deal with. That's obviously not true. It's just like a tough thing because now you're basically saying, hey, I use this like easyjson software, which, to be fair, if you're using Golang, you're probably almost guaranteed to be using this easyjson library, and that's really all it comes down to, right? It's just the appearance, because in terms of real security right now, there's no indicators that this is going the way of, I mean, an XC utils style situation. But there's also nothing that says that it couldn't go there that way in the future, and I think that's the real concern. So you have two big issues, really. You have a sanction issue and having to say I use open source software from a sanctioned country. But also you've got the issue of, well, in a future state, what if they decide to backdoor things with this library? And so that brings up a whole bunch of questions and considerations and things of that nature. And I guess the final thing I'll say in terms of, I actually don't want to get into my opinion on this one yet, Seth. That's the
Okay.
synopsis. That's really, I think, all that is warranted for us to get into this conversation. I think maybe
Yeah.
I'd be more curious to hear your thoughts on, and specifically because you're going to have a customer who this comes up, right? Like, or they might reach out to you and say, hey, how I need advice, right? Like maybe I'm a huge Golang shop. I have this library everywhere. It's obviously a huge pain. I'm sharing S-bombs with other folks. I'm having to say, give an opinion essentially on why we're either or not going to keep this library. Like how would you even approach a conversation like that um,
Yeah.
with
Well,
somebody?
yeah. The reason that this has popped up is I've got it highlighted on the screen right there. But basically, since easyjson is a dependency of Kubernetes, this introduces multiple questions into dependency sourcing, dependency pinning, and what you can actually trust. One of the issues that they've seen with the easyjson library is that it was fairly dormant, like for 2+ years. No, there was no activity. It seemed to be fairly stable. And within the last few months, all of a sudden it's become more active, especially on the Russian side or the Russian developer side of things. Now, there's no known vulnerabilities with easyjson. This is purely attribution and purely fear of future attacks. So think of the XZ or the polyfill attacks that happened in the past. Those were a little bit more overt, but specifically XZ, the ability to take over a package that's in all of these dependencies and you have access to everything. I mean, specifically Kubernetes, right? Like you can't get away from Kubernetes. Most companies have Kubernetes installed, are running it in critical workloads, and there's not this easy off button to turn off a package like this. And so what we're pushing towards from a third party perspective is monitoring, right? Like that's really all that we can do. We can pin libraries to a specific package repository that we control, whether that's Artifactory or something else. Only accept signed versions, but otherwise we're pretty stuck. There's no turning off Kubernetes in most of these environments, or Grafana, some of these others that are in there, SigStore, Prometheus. You can't necessarily just pull that out. You can't roll back to, base versions of Docker and other things when you're so integrated with Kubernetes. And then the other point that I want to make is, where do you stop? Like, where does this end? From an attribution perspective. Like knowing is half the battle. Knowing that there's libraries that are out there that possibly have these sorts of influences gives me the opportunity to actually monitor and rethink what my dependency management and dependency allow list looks like. But the risk is always going to be there that someone's going to take over a package. Just because attribution nowadays on something else is only in a country that you trust or only developers you trust doesn't mean that it's actually going to move. But we need a more hardened process for actually monitoring S-bombs, the bill of materials that's out there for any given software, and then actually making a call on whether or not we should use that software. That's kind of where I go to, Ken. We're going to have to set up monitoring, basically, is what I'm falling towards, because there's no possible way for us to just rip this out. Do you have an alternative? Do you have something else that you
No,
are
actually,
like,
no, I mean, there's some things I wanted to talk about, and because you brought up several things I wanted to. So just to go back for a second, this whole. Now I know like people have been having discussions about easyjson, but my reason for even having this discussion was Abdullah Munawar being sort of like vocal about it with me, and us having a conversation, and that's important because some interesting things came up during that conversation. So first of all, you mentioned there's always going to be that risk, right, that you're trying to manage, which is funny because he and I were like, that's really what this comes down to is risk. It's not zero risk, it's risk management. And when you're a company, you're taking a calculated risk in saying, well, if I don't use open source libraries, then I'm going to spend, I don't know, arbitrarily, I'll say, 12 months, 18 months, whatever, with teams just building libraries that today they could import in seconds for free. I'm not going to take that year and a half to build those libraries, because in a year and a half, I'm not going to have a business if that's how I run it, right? Like my competitors will have shipped the things that I should have shipped. My competitors will have taken the shortcuts that I would love to take, but I'm trying to do things the right way, or something like that, right? So the reality is that businesses make business decisions, which are, why would I slow myself down by multi-year potentially clips, when I can just say, well, okay, we'll just try to manage. Yes, we know it's a risk, but if we're calculated about it, if we manage that risk, we'll accept that, yes, some of that stuff might be developed by Russia, or there's a possibility some North Korean nation state actors are putting out libraries that like have some, I don't know, they take over some library and introduce something like, we'll say like an XC utils type situation, right? These things happen. People know that they happen. They take calculated risks every time they let their developers use open source libraries, and we all freaking do it. So now, how do you manage that risk? Now it comes down to obviously there's multi sides to that. So the one thing that he and I talked about was a package management ecosystem. That's one centralized location. You would normally, in a normal scenario, that's how you would actually, prevent, or I shouldn't say prevent, but you can manage security and sanctions and things like that, right? But the reality is that with Golang, you can just import from GitHub library or from GitHub repos, right? Directly. So there's no central. GitHub effectively finds itself as a package manager without calling itself a package manager in that situation. Right. So that's the first issue that we face with Golang specifically. Now, one thing, I don't give a lot of credit, just and for good reasons. And I'm not trying to start a fight here, but I'm not a huge Sneak fan, right? Like I've used the product, I've seen it. I'm not a huge fan, so I'm not here to give them a ton of credit. But I will say, I've heard good things about Sneak's advisory kind of heads up tooling, and I think that kind of tooling is helpful in getting, hey, more information, at least from what I've been told, right? I've never used that tooling, but from what I've been told, it helps with attestation, it helps with security and things of that nature. One thing I don't know if it does this, but I think also I've heard licenses themselves on those libraries. I know we have to be careful about that in our company, and I assume others have to be comfortable with the licenses they're actually allowing people to use from these open source libraries. But that's kind of what you're looking for, right? Is to manage that risk and get alerted to things that have CVEs, things from countries that are sanctioned, which is tough, right? That's really tough to say, to your point about there being some more activity from the Russian side of things. Is sometimes there's going to be libraries which are heavily developed by people from those countries. Maybe it's not exclusively though, right? And so where's the line? It's if you're from a sanctioned country, do you have to stop working on the project in order for people to use it? Do we have to go back and make sure code developed by those people was, you know what I mean? It gets really, really murky. And so anyways, these are so many thoughts, and this could quickly spawn out of control. But I think, just to summarize what I've all just said, it's yes, manage the risk, have tooling in place for sure, understand that, however, you are managing risk because you're accepting risk by even accepting open source libraries.
Well,
and I don't really know,
one
man,
of the things,
what would you,
one of the
yeah,
things,
I mean,
finish your thought. Yep.
Not my thought. It's going to be a question, but I don't want to ask a question. If you have something you want to go on to, let's talk, or not. You go on. I'm not going to ask the question.
One of the things that I fear and that I run into commonly is startups and newer companies that don't necessarily have a risk management or threat modeling process to consider something like this. And this came up in the panel, right, that you and I, hosted at B-Sides San Francisco, that there are these large corporations that are out there that are fairly mature or cutting edge when it comes to security and their security and risk management process. So in my space, as a consultant, as a third party to a lot of large, mid-size, and small companies, I don't see a good risk management process that takes this into account in most organizations that I deal with. And that's one of the problems that I have on advising how to manage this, because they already don't consider all of the exploits and vulnerabilities and known CVEs that are out there. Companies that are already struggling with building on out of date versions of Alpine Linux, for example, or something else. This is just one more needle in the haystack that they're probably not going to get to. And, we can't always cry wolf. As a third party, I can't come into every one of my companies or every one of my clients and say, hey, easyjson's a concern. You need to rip that out, because they don't have a good vulnerability management process in place as it is, and the developers may or may not actually have control over any of this as they're pushing it out the door. And I realize that that's a cop out, but I can't do that for every one of these that comes along, right? When there is XZ, when there is something else that is a huge problem, we know it's being exploited, like the known exploited vulnerability, the KEV list. Yeah, right. Like, we can scream all we want, and I can induce change there and start to monitor some of these things. But this is an example of one that is a huge problem for me on how to advise a company on what they should be doing that has no process in place. And I don't have a good solution for this outside of, hey, we can tell you when there's an issue. I can go and I can monitor npm and PyPy and Go and other like package repositories, finding these issues, finding attribution. But what does that give us? What is the action that needs to be taken here is where I struggle. And I know my initial answer was, hey, yeah, we monitor. But I'm trying to, in my head, actually go to one of my clients and say, hey, easyjson is something you need to be concerned about, when
Yeah,
they
that's the
already
problem.
struggle.
That was
Yeah.
because we got deeper into that conversation, and part of it was like, well, so how would you monitor? And then it was sort of like, well, usually what you're going to do is you're going to track, like, so for instance, let's say we're talking about contributions, not just vulnerabilities, but like contributions, like who's the actual contributor, right? Because for vulnerabilities, the answer has been pretty terrible, right? Like, we've seen what DependentBot does, and it really just opens about a bajillion PRs with a bajillion sub-dependencies, and you get a report about how vulnerable you are. And the same is true for every other, at least in my experience. I've that's been mostly the case with at least the top. I don't know if I should call them legacy at this point, because they are like the ones that are kind of popular, but maybe legacy. I don't know. I've seen some interesting things coming out in the SCA space, but they all kind of just do the same thing, which is just really get really noisy, and I would say create work that is unnecessary in so many cases. So then the other thing you could look for is like the I suppose anyways, like the location of the develop. There are signals, without getting into all the signals, there are signals that you could use to actually like detect who's the person committing this code, what's the intention of that, and blah 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 blah. But again, the issue with automation is like, now what are you going to do? Basically, just by saying that, I've probably invented a new freaking platform to manage something, right? Like, manage more bugs. Because that's what
Yeah.
it's really going to come down to, is just more notification. I just don't see like a great, you want to manage this risk, but it's like, what's the way to manage this risk? One thing that we did talk about was like having new libraries, not old libraries, but new libraries, um, those going through an automated check of like, who are the developers, trying to do some level of like attestation as to who they are, as well as like the license that's being used. Does that fall under one of our known good licenses? And then I think the third was just looking for, any obvious uh, backdoor type style of activity. But again, right now, is there a solution that's doing this that you know of?
So, like, I don't want to push too far, right? Like, but like, this is one of the things from Redpoint's perspective. Like, we've been looking at attribution for a while for clients and doing deep level like GitHub analysis and monitoring, right? Like, we've got our surveyor tool that does some of this, that watches for these sorts of changes and notifies. And like, one of the things that we've struggled with goes exactly to your point, is that it's added noise on top of what developers are already having to pay attention to and what security people are having to pay attention to. How do you actually ask for a call to action or make a call to action when this is something that they can't control? It's a dependency of a dependency. I have to throw away that main dependency that my developers are already intended or already using, and that may break functionality in the application, or I actually have to replay that. So notification in this case is actually the easy portion of it. So you're seeing other companies that are starting to pop up and do that, whether it's exploitability, whether it's like reachability analysis, whether it's attribution analysis. The guys at socket.dev are the ones that I kind of point to that are mature in that space. We're doing it
Yeah.
more as a targeted, right, like client by client. But there are tools out there that'll give you this sort of analysis, or SBOM analysis, that's starting to dig into all of this attribution. Or Git hacks, right? Like from Paul, I know he's doing that kind of stuff as well. So there are solutions that are out there that'll solve this for you depending on what you want to do. But again, it's not tackling the hard part of this problem. Yes, knowledge of the vulnerability of the issue is, gets you part of the way there, but we don't have a good solution for it outside of, you posted that issue list in GitHub of all of the easyjson pulls or requests to actually remove easyjson from various packages. Uh, so it's going to get solved from an easyjson perspective, because
Yeah, I
there is
chose
all of
issues,
this.
not
Yeah.
I chose issues, not pull requests, because the freaking pull requests are all dependent bot trying to upgrade
Yeah.
the library. So
Yeah. Which upgrade to the latest version, which is probably the one that's controlled. And yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
So
It's just
thanks,
such
Dependabot.
a
Yeah.
and I think about this kind of stuff from like the consumer perspective slash practitioner who's like already just their freaking day is tough, right? Their weeks are tough. And everybody's launching this whole like, everybody's got an opinion about AI. Everybody's posting, this, that, and the other. And I go back to like, yeah, but that's all neat and fine and well. But are we getting these fundamental things completely wrong? And I feel like we still are, right? These things should be more obvious and they're just not. It's like, I don't know. I just feel bad for the person that has to deal with this on a day in and day out basis, where they're
Yeah.
just overloaded with options and noise and tasks, and just not handed things that I don't know. It's a tough position to be in. It's I would say like consulting's not easy, right? But I think you'd agree that consulting at least has some benefits where things like that aren't as you don't have to like sort of. It's not a lot of fire. You're not putting out
Mhm.
fires constantly with like yeah. It's not to say it's not a tough job, but it's not quite the same. And obviously mine is not easy, but certainly I get to at least build the things I want that I think need to be built. Whereas you may not have. And I don't know. I'm just saying it's a tough role for practitioners, I guess. Is trying to say.
It is. It is, right? Like, um, and again, this goes back to my points about asking them to make changes, right? We've struggled with surfacing this sort of deep analysis on projects with customers because there's no good call to action outside of, hey, we're monitoring this situation and may ask you to do something eventually,
Yeah.
which doesn't necessarily rise to the level of priority that they normally are concerned about. One of the things that we've been playing with and we've been experimenting with is some sort of like AppSec threat report that would include this sort of analysis. Right? So
Yeah.
you've got a list of SBOMs. We know how your software is built. We know what the traffic to your website looks like. We can tell you on a daily basis, hey, or a weekly basis, hey, this is what you need to be concerned about in the news and how we can actually summarize it and we can prioritize. That's part of what you would pay for a consultant to do. But it still is in early stages from our perspective because there's so much context that we have to learn. And I kind of go back to this, Ken, right? The discussion that Daniel Miessler had, the presentation that he gave at the Aegis of Tomorrow event that we threw, where he talks about context of an organization, context of a person inside of an LLM or inside of a hosted instance. And then we start to make analysis or perform analysis on that, on current priority, current threats, based on the context of what you have and what you know about a person, a company, or an entity in general. I think that's where it's going to go. I'll be honest. That's all that I'm doing nowadays is building context. And I know like you guys are talking about contextual security analysis from a code perspective at dry run specifically, but when I
Oh, this is
start to
different. Yeah.
zoom out, yeah,
No, what you're talking about is really just, yeah, that idea of like assigning an identity to an entity and then having all the context about that identity and its, actions and motivations and things of that nature. I think that's what you're saying. And in that case,
yeah,
that's a totally different, yeah. And I remember Daniel talking about this, and I'm sure he'll have more public material released around all of this as well. But it's a really neat, concept. And yeah, I think you're not wrong. That's like potentially the next wave of how we start to think about detecting signals of people that are, introducing backdoors. But at the same time, like as we've been talking about this, I'm like at the same time, like what is the real what's the risk of having a backdoor library, right? Um, Obviously, to an individual organization, it's not great. But the fact of the matter is, while I was working on material earlier this morning to like talk about on the podcast, I literally had to just keep scrolling past breach notification after breach notification after breach notification after breach notification. And I honestly, the whole time was like, oh, Pearson got hacked. Okay, cool. Uh, hundreds of thousands of records released. Okay, cool. So and so's been breached. Okay, cool. And I'm just like, I don't really care. Like, whatever, that happened, that happened. And so why am I saying this? I'm saying like, yeah, your company gets backdoored and there's a breach. All right. Now it's different, however, in this case, because we're talking about so many open source products that are reliant on this library. That's what changes the game here. And so I guess why I'm saying that is part of me thinks you can only do so much as an individual organization. And even if you don't, it tends to be that your stocks end up going up in the long run anyways. Right.
yeah.
Go back to that's a nod to Charlie Miller's talk at AppSec Cali. But in any case, I don't, it's like, oh, here's a perfect example. Do you remember the Hertz breach that was just,
Yes.
yeah. They're like a top mover in stocks right now. Like, I think I got that notification today or yesterday. And there was like another company listed in the same breadth, which was another company that had gotten breached. And I can't remember who it was recently. And I was like, so the top movers stock wise are the companies that fucked up the biggest. Cool. Like, awesome. You know what I mean? Like, so let's just be
Yeah.
real about security. Like, sometimes we just don't matter as much as we think we matter, right? Like that's just the case. This for an individual company probably doesn't matter all that much. Even as cool as that would be to know that somebody's like introducing backdoors into your open source libraries ahead of time and how useful that would be. Yeah, for the work that goes into it, will we ever tackle that and the cost of that? I don't know. But when it comes to that for open source, big, Apache and Kubernetes and everybody, kind of rallying around upgrading things, then yeah, that matters. So I don't know. That's just another consideration to take into account here while I'm
Yeah.
getting really nihilistic about security.
Well, I mean, you should be, right? Like you mentioned the Pearson breach, right? Like if you go look at their stock price, there is no reflection of that breach in it. If
And
anything, they're
whatsoever.
up a little bit, none whatsoever. So it's not too nihilistic, in my view, to realize that security in general doesn't really affect stock prices and doesn't matter to the business world at this point. Man, and maybe this will be one of the topics for an upcoming panel that we do, is whether or not breaches matter.
I mean, that's a real question I have at times. Like
Yeah.
I know that I care, obviously I care, and that people will have feelings, and that's all very valid. And so yes, it's bad. And at the same time, I don't feel like most consumers care. And at the same time, I don't feel like businesses care. And the reason is because consumers don't care, right? Like
Mhm.
money impacts in a capitalist environment, money impact, which you argue how you want, it does impact positively or negatively the actions of companies, oftentimes in relation to things like this. And we can see that in this case, just really didn't matter. And let me put it. Hold on, just because like I wanted to show you how easy it is for me to tell you which breaches happened. There were 4 breaches I read about just in the first couple seconds. I went through the different newsletters that I'm subscribed to try and get some of this reading material, or excuse me, this podcast material that we do every week. So Pearson Ascension, Valsaft, and SKT, a South Korean telecom company, they were breached as well. So yeah, bunch of breaches, and I could keep going on. That was literally 10 seconds of effort to find those 4 breaches. So that's what I'm saying. Like, let's not pretend too that it. I know it matters. You know it matters, but I'm just saying to some people that doesn't matter.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And it is extremely disheartening to go. There's companies that monitor breaches and where they're actually being disclosed. If you go check out some of those, just go Google, breaches, whatever it is, right? Like, figure out a way to do it. But some of those, I'm looking at Breach Sense right now. If you look through the list of what's actually been breached in May, a lot of these aren't huge companies, but still like dozens and dozens of breaches. And none of them really get attention, right? Okay, so we have the article on Pearson's, we've got a couple others that have popped up, like you said. But does anybody really care anymore, right?
If a
Yeah,
tree falls, no one's there to hear it.
yeah. If a
Or
breach
if everyone's
happens,
there to hear it, but nobody cares that the tree fell.
what does it matter, right? Uh, Sinatra, yeah, like that's Aaron. Maybe if it's user DNA in the leak, I don't have any positive response to that we know anyone would care. I mean,
Well,
the DNA data went up for sale because whichever company actually went bankrupt and somebody bought it, right? Like, and did anyone really look into who was buying all that DNA data? No.
no, I mean, like, dude, here's one. I don't know how to say it. I don't know if it's Circa or Kerka but
Yeah. So,
there is
yeah.
a dating app, and I don't know anything about that stuff, but I do know that you put in personal information, and then when you read this article that I've got from alexshapiro.com, basically goes through in this article about like, hey, I found a couple things. One is that They don't require, you basically don't have to use a password, you use an OTP code to log in. So if you put in a valid username or email, it actually comes back in the response that like, here's your, like hidden in the body of the response, like here's your OTP code. And then you're supposed to like presumably go on your, on your machine or on your SMS and then like put in your OTP code or whatever it is. But again, like they give you the OTP code. You just, if you view the source, like you'll see it. So you don't need to actually have access to basically bypasses two-factor auth, which is ridiculous. Second to that though, is that there's endpoints listed under /docs. I guess they use like GoBuster or something like that. They found a /docs directory, which was just, like you think Swagger docs exposed, but those Swagger docs revealed the location of endpoints that allowed you to grab anything from like, so I think the only thing that was gated behind the sign-in, which we know is broken and can be bypassed, was maybe like your passport or driver's license information or something like that. But everything else, like phone number, personal, like preferences, all kinds of PI, really important PII, totally enumerable, unauthenticated. You don't even have to use the bypass of sign-in. And again, did you hear about this? Did anybody else hear about this? I mean, no, it's like that's actually like just, the only reason I'm bringing this up is the type of data is like pretty damn sensitive data. Like even unauthenticated, I thought I saw date of birth on there, right? So phone number, date of birth, name, email address, like all the stuff that you want to protect, right? Like at the highest levels, just easily exposed. And again, did anyone hear about this? I mean, I had to go digging to find an article like this. So like,
yeah. Well, it's
I'm just
good. I
ranting.
mean, it's good. It's good research. It's not surprising to me as someone that looks at different apps day in and day out. Yes, this one from Alex Shapiro is bad, but it's not out of the realm of normality for me. I see
For you.
applications. Yeah, exactly. I see
That's
applications
not supposed to be normal, Seth.
at least every 6 months that are probably just as exploitable as this one is, especially from a sensitive data exposure perspective. And this goes back to that breach report, the breach discussion that we were having, where if it's exposed, does anyone care? Yes, the developers care. Yes, they claim that everything is encrypted and protected, and we have data classification routines. We have information security policies in place. We have been through our SOC 2 type 2 and determined that we are secure, and yet the data is leaking out the back end and it's on the deep web now. And we're not going to get punished for it from a business perspective. So do we really care? And maybe I'm just being nihilistic today. That can be the case, but
Yeah,
it happens. Yeah.
I mean, I'm feeling pretty like, again, we know that there is desire to secure these things, right, and not have this happen. So there wouldn't be RSA, there wouldn't be DEF CON, there wouldn't be these gigantic conferences if there wasn't, at least with RSA, if there wasn't money and skin in the game, then we know that wouldn't exist with DEF CON. It wouldn't be interesting if to like hack into things if there wasn't a desire to defend against those hacks, right? Like you need both sides. Provably, just through evidence, we can show that there is people care, right? But the point is like to what degree and to what degree we're willing to spend the money and the effort and solution that out, and then to what end is that actually a meaningful outcome for people, right? And that's it's that gets into more like a CISO, I feel like, style conversation of business
Yeah.
risks and cost and level of effort and blah 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 blah. But I think both are valid conversations.
Yeah.
People who are the practitioners dealing with it day in and day out, and the CISOs who have to make critical decisions about what is good enough.
Mhm. Well, and I mean, there's tools that are out there that will monitor for this sort of data leak, that'll monitor for application security exploits, for attempts to actually get at this sort of data. But it really does raise to the level of the CISO, to your point. If the organization does not take security seriously, they're probably going to show up in a breach report at some point.
Yep.
And even if they do take it seriously, mistakes happen, and an organization is going to show up in a breach report.
Yep.
It might not be the full customer base. I mean, GitHub showed up in a breach report, right? Like, Netflix has, Yahoo has, and it's all part of that maturity process of maturing an organization's risk assessment and security analysis. So expect it to happen, but realize that there are ways to prevent it and keep at it. I guess there's no other way to really, nothing else I can really say to that outside of keep at it.
Yeah. And I know there's folks trying to help improve the lives of people securing things through various means, open source projects, guides, communities, people paid for products, obviously. There's all kinds of avenues where people are trying to tackle these problems, but it's also healthy to sometimes look back and say, is that a benefit? Is it worth it? You have to ask these questions. I mean, these are you have to.
I think I've mentioned it before.
Point, right?
When I worked for the bank, the joke that we always made was, hey, why don't we just release all of our customers' bank data, specifically like PII that we had for customers, pay the fine to the FDIC, and then we don't have to worry about protecting it anymore.
Yeah.
Because it's already out there. I feel like the industry in general has gone that direction. It was a joke that we were making at the time because we took it very seriously, detecting threats, trying to protect this data, making sure that we didn't necessarily leak it out there. But then we had things like OPM happen and other places that actually leaked the same data that we're supposed to treat as protected, sensitive data internal to an organization. It's already out there. So where should we put our energy is a good question to ask. Where is the threat that our organization, or what is the threat that our organization has when it comes to protecting this data? Is it, lack of trust to our users? You can take all those typical threat modeling activities into it. So I would consider that. Yeah.
You bring up actually this you triggered a thought in my mind too, which is like, there are ramifications though, right? Like, and it's not necessarily that your stock price goes down or that whatever. It's like when you had said if you get breached, something you said made me think like, yeah, your life if you get breached, like life gets a little bit harder. And I thought about that in a concrete way. And it's like, yeah, so, public companies, I think, have to disclose within, I believe, 4 days of a breach. Publicly, they have to disclose or something like that, or at least go through start the process. I don't know. I'm not an expert. Don't quote me. But I know that they have an obligation, right? And I also know that the second that you are breached, the SEC can make your life miserable. They really can.
Yes.
They can make your life a living hell. And like, you end up having to follow very, very stringent regulations from that point forward, cybersecurity wise. And so it's not like there's no penalty, right? There are compliance, there are like regulations, there are compliance standards, there are things that will happen. If you can't, like, I don't know, if your statuses were revoked compliance wise, I don't know that that's actually I mean, I actually don't know. I don't know why I don't know that, but I don't know if that's happened. Sorry, I'm very naive, I guess, about that. But meaning like, someone was breached and then like say they had 3 or 4 certificate compliance requirements or compliance standards they SOC 2, FISMA, or FedRAMP, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
ISO 27001, whatever. So
Yeah.
if you lose those statuses, then obviously like sales becomes a real problem, and supporting your customers become a real problem. But again, I don't actually, now that I'm saying this all out loud, I'm like, shit, I've spent decades in this career field, and I don't even know if I know if there's been a case where like someone's multiple things have been stripped from them. I don't know. Do you know
Yeah.
that,
I don't
or
know from a
that kind of
compliance
information?
perspective if it ever has been stripped. I think the only organization that I really feel has done that is probably PCI, right? At least in the US, right? Like the payment card industry, if you are breached and they get a hold of cardholder data, there are significant penalties that are incurred, and you lose that certification, and you have to go, I think, to the next level of certification in order to actually jump into it. So we'll have to look and see. I know in the EU, the privacy penalties for GDPR, they regularly punish companies for exposing PII. They've been better about it, and that's that is a significant hurdle to get over, or significant penalties that they induce. To Jason's point in comments, right? Sounds similar to parking tickets costing less than actually paying for a parking spot. Um, yeah, when the penalties don't exceed the actual cost of doing business, of course you're going to take that penalty until it becomes a worse outcome to yeah
So
the outcome is worse. So,
So I did ask ChatGPT. Yes, that's
of
true.
course, yes.
And I did ask ChatGPT because I was curious, right?
Mhm.
And I have sources here, so I'm actually trying to read. I was trying to read some of the sources to validate that this is all true. But so far, the first few look real. So I'll talk to those. I'll speak to those. So, did you know TAR in 2011? It was a Dutch CA, and they were breached in 2011. And the breach led to them filing bankruptcy within weeks, because it led the Dutch government to revoke them, and revoke them as a CA, obviously, and then revoke all of their certificates. And so then, yeah, they had to file for bankruptcy within weeks of that. Then in 2005, Car System Solutions was storing credit cards unencrypted. They had their PCI DSS compliance certificate, um, and after they were breached and 40 million credit cards were exposed, Visa and MasterCard revoked the company's ability to process card transactions and killed the company. Blackbaud in 2020, a cloud software provider for nonprofits, experienced a ransomware attack that compromised sensitive customer data. The company paid the ransom but delayed disclosure of the breach. Subsequent investigations revealed that they had misrepresented the scope of the breach, leading to a $3 million fine from the SEC, and almost a $50 million settlement with 49 out of 50 states, and specific compliance certifications were not revoked. So they had all those things happen, but in 2020, even with all that bad stuff happening, nothing was revoked. This is where it gets a little tricky too, because in 2017, Equifax, they had their ISO 27001 certification, right? They had a massive breach. 147 million individuals' information was breached, and the certificate was not revoked. No impact there. I could keep
Yeah.
going on. This
Well,
isn't a good look. Some of this is like,
it's
okay,
not.
yeah, there are real times where it's like, yeah, it goes bad. And there's other times where it's like, no, you're big enough and you have enough money and you have enough like whatever. Don't worry about it.
And that's one of the issues that we have with the government regulations specifically, right? GDPR, HIPAA, the penalties, while they can be extensive, it takes a long time for them to take effect. So, so GDPR, for example, you have 72 hours in the case of a breach to actually report that it's happened. Great. But you may not be fined for 6 months or longer. And so the whole strategy at that point is going to be reducing what that looks like and maybe getting around it, getting around what those breach penalties are going to be. And the same thing probably happens in the HIPAA space and other spaces as well. And this is one case where, yes, protection is great from a governmental perspective because government wants to keep their people safe, but the industry in general, like Visa and MasterCard, guess what? They're going to act a lot quicker on those sorts of problems and those sorts of breaches because it affects their bottom line, and they're going to be called onto the carpet at the next investor meeting if they don't act in those situations. So it's this weird dichotomy of governmental regulations, industry regulations, what actually causes a company to go under or has a material effect when a breach happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What matters? What matters? Will I mean, that's really, I think, what in a nutshell, what matters and to who and why.
Yep.
It seems pretty, it's a very diverse spectrum of considerations, we'll say. It sounds like.
Yeah, it is.
To think
It
through.
is. And I don't have an answer for it. I don't think you have an answer
I don't have
for
an
it
answer
either.
No, hell no.
Yeah.
I just have just sort of
I have thoughts and feelings.
Lament and feelings, yes. But no, yeah, anyways. I got my thoughts. I don't know, dude. It's definitely, I think what we're going to see is that there will be better detection and improvements in this space, but again, it's like, there will also be new things and new problems, and there are going to be variants of the same old. Again, I know we always talk about AI a lot lately, but in that space, all of the same things will occur and yeah, be an issue. So I did want to ask you, we've got a little bit of time left. We could go through another article. I'm curious if you wanted to, or if you just sort of wanted to leave people with your final thoughts, or where you want to go from here.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, we've talked about the breach stuff. There's a couple of new tools that we highlighted that maybe we could. I think I would rather push some of those into the newsletter for this week, though. Let people discover them on their own, and we'll drop them into Slack as well. If you have
one thing I
not
did want to
signed up,
mention. Oh, sorry. Well, no, I was just going to mention that next Tuesday with Kyra.
Oh, yes.
Hopefully I'm saying that right. Kyra will be joining us, and the actually, let me post the link to the discussion. I thought it's actually going to be a pretty, I think, here's the promo for it. But I think it's going to be a pretty interesting conversation. And I'll tell you why. Just give me 1 sec here as I get all these links and everything, kind of, because I have another one about. And this actually, what's funny is this is so timely given the conversation that we had today. This is not planned, but you can get an idea from that blog post I just posted about where this conversation is going to go, but it's essentially a TSA pre-check for open source developers. So it couldn't be more apropos and timely for the kind of discussion we're having this week. I think, honestly, it'll set us up well for that conversation next week. Got lucky, not planned. And actually, yes, very planned, very masterful. You and I are very, very intelligent people who think through these things deeply. No, jokes aside, just got lucky. That'll really feed well in the next week's conversation. So, all right. So
yeah, and I was thinking about that as well, right? Like, it'll be a good discussion to actually dig into what his thoughts on that sort of approval, right? Like, our process is I've always thought about the underwriters laboratory stuff that we have for engineering and for plugs, right? For electrical outlets or electrical utilities, that how we could actually play or use that same sort of a concept in security or software in general, right? You have to meet minimum standards to actually do something, handle data, whatever it is. I mean, there could be arguments from the industry or from government that HIPAA or other regulations do that sort of thing, but I don't feel like there is a central organization that necessarily approves like Underwriters Laboratory does and meets those specific standards. So it either way, right? Like the discussion will be interesting from a TSA pre-check perspective, and we will bring up some of the items that we've discussed today with Kyra, however you
First
pronounce
question:
their
does
name.
it matter? No, I'm joking.
Yes.
That's not going to be the first question.
Does it matter? Yes. Yeah. But outside of that, I think, we have been going for about an hour today. I appreciate everyone interaction, the discussion. We did not plan to go into breaches and all of this today. Just kind of organically happened based on the articles, which is, I think, how we like it. So if you want to join the conversation, jump into Slack. We'll continue it there. I know Andrew was posting some things as well, and random as well. Came here for the AppSec and stays for the nihilism, right? Security doesn't even matter. Yep, exactly. Yeah, I don't know. Any final thoughts, Ken? We'll go ahead and wrap it up for today.
Yeah, so just a reminder, we logistics wise, we had to move the course that we were going to give this month to next month. There are seats though, June 16th and 17th. It's secure code review, perfect for consultants, developers, whoever needs to learn secure code review. Share with whoever you feel makes sense to share with, please. And if you're listening to this and you have not watching or listening and you've not subscribed to the podcast, I'll do the standard YouTuber thing, right? Like, subscribe, et cetera. It really helps support the channel, and our time on it. And yeah, just thanks to the listeners. Really appreciate it every week. And yeah, that's all I have to add.
Yep. Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today, and we will catch you all online. Join us next week for our discussion with Kyra, and we'll go from there. Thanks all.